All right. Well, welcome to GoGuardian. This is kind of GoGuardian 101. Hopefully there aren't any like power users out there that are just going to try and, I don't know, sit in here and maybe find out another tidbit, because we're going to try to go through kind of a starting session with GoGuardian. I'm going to present my screen on the show starts camera, and hopefully you guys will be able to see that. And then I'll be on the other camera to answer questions and whatnot. So let me present my screen. All right, spectacular. So you guys can see that, which is good. Whoop. So I made a little GoGuardian classroom intending to have people join it, but then I tested it out this morning, and apparently it only works with the kids' accounts. So if you join up, it won't show anything. So here's our GoGuardian login screen. Logging in with Google. If you haven't ever done this before, you will not have classes, but I think most people do. This import with Google Classroom is where you're going to pull in your classes from your Google Classrooms, and they'll already be pre-populated with students. It does sync every once in a while, but if you needed to, you could go into kind of one of your classes and go into your students and sync up students if you happen to have a class change. Now, for GoGuardian to work, your students have to be logged into their app account and on their devices. So a lot of times we'll have students with broken Chromebooks, and that will not show up on GoGuardian, unfortunately. If you were to run a GoGuardian session, this is how I pretty much use it. I'll go into my amazing GoGuardian club over here so I can start it. Normally, if we started it up, we can select the time and we can apply scenes, and I'll talk about scenes in a second. We start our session, and our students will appear here, and we'll be able to see what's on their screens. One of the big features that I use is the chat feature, which you can turn the chat on. And then if we had a student, a little chat bubble would pop up here, and you can click on it and communicate with all of your students individually. So when I'm giving a test using GoFormative, or if I'm doing class kick assignments, I can actually push out messages to individual students like, hey, I'm seeing that you're struggling with this on your screen. Or, hey, they have a question. I say, send me a message right on there. And then I can individually talk to my students through GoGuardian, as opposed to trying to talk to them individually in a Google Meet when all their friends are hearing those questions or seeing those questions. So I find that students will actually interact with me a little bit more through GoGuardian, because they know that it's just with me and not with their entire class. So that's one of the main features. If I go into one of my, you can also end your sessions whenever. If I go into one of my previous classes, and I go into one of my previous sessions, one of the cool things is that you can look through and see, bad example. Let's grab, there we go. So one of the cool things is that even if you're not noticing stuff in real time, like what the kids are using, you can go back and look at the timelines and see if you were doing a test, if a kid were to change over. So they were taking STAR testing during this little snippet. And so I can see if any app pops up that isn't Renaissance. Now, in this case, I locked them down so that they couldn't use anything but Renaissance. So hopefully it shouldn't pop up. But you can actually go back into your timeline to check individual classes and look at all your kids in the moment if you're doing assessment. Any questions so far before we kind of open things up? No. All right. Has anybody experimented with scenes? Just give me a little hand raise. Are people interested in hearing about scenes? All right. Okay. So with each class, over here on the left, you have your classrooms, your calendar. With your calendar, you can schedule classes. But scenes, you can create a session or a scene where you can limit what tabs and what programs a student has open on their screen. So I have two scenes right now. I have the formative scene, which I named. You can switch between allow mode and block mode. I block everything except for the websites that I want them to use. Then I put in the websites that I want them to be able to use. So I have the Google Classroom, I have formative, Meet, and then this was their Google account because they had to sign in, so they had to be allowed to do this. So those are the only things that the students will be able to open at that particular time if that scene is running. That will also allow you to push out a tab to them. So if I go to my other scene, my STAR testing scene, the district actually has some scenes you can include. So I pulled in the STAR testing, which gives their websites locked down to just the ones they need for STAR testing. But I also pushed out down here in tab management, auto open a tab. This auto opens the place where they're going to click on to start STAR testing. So for example, if you were going to do a formative assessment and you wanted them to only be allowed to use formative, you can also have it open a formative tab immediately when you start that scene. And so the only thing that they can have open is formative, and it pops it right up on their screen. So you don't have to say, okay, everybody go to formative now and wait for all the kids. It just pushes it right there. So I found that kind of useful. I discovered that yesterday while I was playing around with this. So it's pretty powerful. You can also limit the number of tabs that students have open. I don't know why that would be useful, but it might be for some reason. You could put it on, you know, one tab, and then that tab that you push out to them is the only thing they can open. They can't even try to open another tab. But I don't know why they would need to have a limit of like 9 tabs. So those are the big ways that I'm kind of using this now. I know that other people have gone in and they've actually in their calendars scheduled GoGuardian sessions for every single one of their classes. I find for me that I don't like doing that because I will start a GoGuardian session only after I get kids in the room and I figured out who's there and not there, and then I end the session. I'll usually make it like a 2-hour time frame when I start a session. So if I go into my classroom, I would just make it like a 2-hour time frame. And then I end the session when we're done with whatever we're done doing. So that way, if it's a 30-minute class or if it's a 10-minute class, I just end that session manually. That's what I've found to be the most useful. You can go in and schedule all of your classes, but just be aware that even if that class doesn't happen for some reason, it will start. And then if students are home, like their screens are just going to pop up and start being recorded what they're doing on your side. So it's going to keep track of their tabs and whatnot. I'd love to be able to go in and show you what you can do with individual students, but because those functions only work when I actually have students, I can't really do that. You can close tabs on them. You can see every tab that they have open. You can lock their computer down. So if they're just not listening, you can force their Chromebook to be in a state of like basically a brick until you release it. So that way maybe you can get their attention. I do really love to see individual kids when they're working on tests, be able to see their work. Sometimes they'll ask me a question and I'll say, put it on your screen so I can actually see what you're doing. And that's very useful. But I've talked for 10 minutes and I would love questions, quandaries, queries, conundrums, any kind of whatever you guys got. Put it in the chat or throw it out over the microphone. Your choice.
So Mike, when I set up my scenes I only set it up for my like first period, but then it showed in all my periods. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the scenes you create are kind of a library of scenes. So once you make a scene, it's there for all of your classes, and you could use that for all of your classes. So you only have to make it once, which is nice. One little advanced thing I'll say about scenes, if people aren't going to have any questions, is you can use what is called a wildcard. So for example, on my screen here, you'll see it says meet.google.com, and I put a little asterisk next to it. That asterisk is a wildcard, meaning any website that starts with meet.google.com and then has other stuff after it will be allowed in that scene. You can also put the wildcard before it to allow anything that has before that.
Okay, that may relate to my question then as a follow-up to Julie's, Mike, because if I understood you properly, for scenes, it's blocking everything but the sites that I input. So those Google Meet codes would be different for the 5 classes. But if I put an asterisk, then it'll still take all those different codes for the 5 different classes?
Yeah, so definitely, that will definitely work. If you put the asterisk, it'll take all the different codes. There are some sites, I think that if you put in their parent website, it allows everything. So like I was talking to Andrew yesterday, and he was saying that he has Google Meets in there and he didn't have to put the wildcard, and it still allowed the different Google Meets to work. So that might be something to experiment with. But if you put the wildcard, it will definitely work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the wildcard's kind of cool because maybe, you're exploring the National Geographic website or something, and you want kids to be able to explore only that website, but you don't want to restrict them as to where they can go in there. You just put that wildcard in there, and then they can go anywhere in that website, but nowhere else.
Mike, would there be any disadvantage to putting everything with a wildcard?
Only if you are trying to restrict them even within those sites. If you only wanted them on a particular document or something like that, if it was a Google Doc, if you opened up all of Google Docs, then they could open up whatever Google Docs they wanted. Over here on the right-hand side in the little lists of things, you'll see that the GoGuardian quick list actually has a G Suite link. If you include that, it actually includes all of the Googles. Slides, talk, all of the Googles. So if you ever wanted to just restrict kids to just being able to use Google stuff, you could just add that in as a scene. And then it's quickly as you could remove that as well, just that quickly too. So if you wanted to just edit that scene. You can start scenes partway through a class as well. You do not actually have to push out the scene immediately. I don't know if I can show you that. I go to my amazing GoGuardian club. And over here, there's a little drop down, so you can actually start a scene in a session. So that means if you're like partway through your class and you're like, okay, we're going to take a class, or we're going to take a test or whatever, I'm going to start the formative scene, and it's going to lock down their computers and push out formative to them. So that would allow them to, or allow you to have a little bit more flexibility. They could be, searching something, and then you start up the scene if you were doing that in a class. You can also end sessions in the middle of a class and then start them right back up again. The kids don't really realize when that's happening. If you refresh a session, if a kid hadn't joined, you can actually just pop them back into class. You can remove users too, so I found that useful. I'll have kids end a test and then they sign off, and I don't want to keep tracking what they're doing or restrict their motions. So if there's a little triple dot on the top right-hand side, and you can just kick that user out of your session. So if I have 5 kids taking a test and 4 of them finish, I just boot all those kids and then let the one sit in my session.
I have kind of a strange question. I was watching my kids on Kia the other day, and some of the kids I could see on Kia, but some of the kids I can only see the grid of faces. How do I see what they're doing?
I'm not sure what you mean by the grid of faces.
You know how you're looking at the screen right now and you can see a grid of all these faces?
Yep.
That's all I saw on their particular GoGuardian.
I have the same thing.
Go ahead.
I had the same thing when they were taking a formative. Like 2 kids had that, Lisa, and the rest were on the formative. I don't know, but I know the kids were doing the formative.
So it was showing their Google Meet window. It wasn't showing their formative window. It's a great question. In those cases, I would probably try and like refresh that kid. Like you can boot them out and then join them back in. Once you kick them out, it says like rejoin. It'll give a big button on their face that says rejoin, and then that could refresh their activity. That's what I would try. I haven't encountered that, so I'm not sure of a fix.
Is it possible that they were really doing the assessment or whatever on a different device and they just had Google, they had the Meet up on the Chromebook?
That is possible.
I've run into that a lot too, Amy, where, and I wondered about that. It's fine if they're using their device, but there are kids who are having trouble, or for some other reason, they prefer to use a different device. So then you really can't see what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah, that is a limiting factor on GoGuardian, is that they have to be on that app's account synced in there so that we can see what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not, if they, their Chromebook is broken for whatever reason or whatnot, it's very easy to have students who are not synced in there.
In the session we just did on assessment, some of the science teachers were saying that you can, like if a kid logs into Chrome on their Chromebook and they have a Chrome account, well, they can log into that Chrome account on another device, and then we can see them on GoGuardian. I haven't tried that out myself yet, but I'd like to explore that, and that way we can still see kids if they're not on their school-issued device.
Yeah, that was the thing that was the question that I was talking about at the beginning, guys. I think you're only going to be able to see what's in that Chrome window in that case. They could open up other windows, obviously, on those computers or phones, and it wouldn't show them what they were doing. But the Chrome window may be visible only if they sync their apps account on that Chrome window. So that's something you can choose to try and explore with kids on your own if you want to. But that is definitely more of jumping through hoops, and trying to get a student to do that might be a little challenging.
Mike, have you used the off-task alerts yet?
I have not used the off-task alert. I did look at it yesterday. It's pretty cool. You can set the amount of time that they have to be off their tab before it alerts you. So there's like a moderate setting, which is 30 seconds, and then there's a wider window and a narrower window, but it will give you nice little notifications. With the chat, same thing. It will give you notifications, and I actually discovered that if you go into the chat window and go into your settings, you can get audio alerts to chat bubbles, which I didn't know was there, because I missed a kid's question for about 20 minutes, and then he was like, fine, I'll just do it on my own. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't see that question pop up at all, and there was no alert. So you can actually turn sounds on to get those alerts. I haven't tried them, but I imagine they work pretty well. The chat works pretty well too.
Thanks.
Yeah, that happened to me once when there was a question or something popped up in the chat. A student got back to me, because they don't always get back, when I do, because I love using that chat function. I found that to be really helpful. But then it's maybe towards the very end of the class, and then I'm trying to scramble and write notes back to the student, and they're not even probably going to see it, right? Because as soon as the class is over, that session's done. So then I end up like putting something in Google Classroom to just that student to respond, so they don't feel like I've ignored them.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of functions in GoGuardian. You can use it very basically. You can just start a class and then start a session, and you'll be able to see what most of them are on. Or you can schedule, you can use chat, you can use scenes. The layers keep kind of going up to how much you can restrict and how much you can use. I would recommend just jumping in and starting it on a class first before you start trying to play around with all the features. And then as you learn it, add in those layers and start to use it as much as you can to benefit your students. Don't make it a headache, but it is good to have it going just so that there's a record. Like Tara asked me the other day if a student was using their Chromebook. And so I just popped into GoGuardian and said, well, they were in my class, but I have no record of them on GoGuardian. So they obviously weren't logged in with their Chromebook. So just even a good record to have.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right, it is 8 o'clock, folks. Thank you for joining me on this super amazing GoGuardian hour. Well, 20 minutes. Have a great day, and I'm sure I will see you around the buildings.